participant power of choice. And the power of choice that the participant has is to decide what type of life they want to live and who they want to work for them, and how much they want to pay them. So there's a lot of power there. And the way it works is you, as a participant, will receive a set amount of money per year. And I like to imagine this money as imaginary money. It's not money that gets wired into your checking account by any means. I wish it were. It's money that you never get to touch, but it's money nonetheless that you can use to expense different types of classes and programs through a reimbursement process. And so that is what this whole model is based on. It's an annual fund that you get to use to build programming specific to your needs. And one of the key players in this program is the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. And this is an agency that offers a ton of services, and they really focus on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And they help people make decisions about what homes they want to live in, what types of jobs they want to work, what types of jobs they want to work, and what types of relationships they want to pursue in the community. It's a really important agency because, as we'll come to discuss a little later, when we go over the eligibility overview, OPWDD is your way in to getting self-direction. So a person needs to be deemed eligible by OPWDD, and they need to have what we call a home and community-based service waiver, which is a federal waiver. And once a person has these two items, then they can take next steps into pursuing a self-directed model. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. But let's talk a little bit about some of the power that you are afforded as a self-directed participant. And one of that really important pieces that you have now in a self-directed model, which is unlike the traditional model, where in the traditional model, an agency is really responsible for making a lot of these decisions as far as who it is you get to hire, who it is that works with you, and how much they get paid. In the self-directed model, the ability to make those choices, those employer choices, are now put on the shoulders of the participant or their caregivers. So you get to choose who works with you, how often they work with you, and if you dislike their work, you get to fire them and hire someone else. So that's really, really pivotal, and I think empowering when it comes to making these types of choices for the staffing supports that the participant really wants to have around them. Another really, really important category that the self-directed model brings to the table is something called the budget authority. And as I mentioned, when I gave an overview very briefly of what self-direction was, I mentioned something called the budget, this annual fund that you're allotted every year, this set amount of money. And so what the budget authority is it allows the participant to now make decisions about how that money gets divvied up. You get to choose where you want to put that money in your budget. If you imagine the budget as an Excel sheet with a bunch of different categories, let's say, for example, you are afforded $40,000 for the year. And now you want to decide how to spend that money. So as a participant, no one makes that decision for you. You get to choose what you want to do. And if the participant needs assistance in making that decision, then the caregivers, whether it's their parents or their guardians, get to assist in making those decisions for them. And so you get to choose, well, I might use $20,000 to pay for my staffing supports for the year, meaning to have like my one-to-one assistant who works with me on the weekends or after school. And I might use $10,000 to pay for community classes that I want to partake in, and I want to put $10,000 in another category. The budget is quite extensive and has lots of categories, but just imagine it as an Excel sheet with all these various columns and entry fields in which you can place a set amount of money that doesn't exceed your budget allocated to you. So that is your budget authority, which is really, really an interesting concept. And the reason that I really gravitated towards this program is because at its core, it adopts this philosophy of person-centered planning. And that is a philosophy that aims to put at its center the participants' strengths, preferences, and interests. And so what happens is when we're building budgets and when we're building plans for what the participants going to do with their money, we're going to really try and make it revolve around the person and not what we want. And so it really serves as the bedrock for every discussion and conversation we have in every meeting. Um, and when it comes to who's involved in those meetings, we have a team of people called the Circle of Support. And that team uses this philosophy, and it consists, this philosophy of person-centered planning, and it consists of anyone the participant wants to be there, the participant themselves, their teachers, if they have teachers, therapists, their brokers, their care managers, and we'll talk more about who these people are a little later. But this team works together to talk about what are some goals that the participant may have, what are some things that can be implemented to help the participant succeed in the program, what types of choices will be beneficial choices, what types of programming will be meaningful programming for the participant. So this team has to meet twice a year to review whatever goals they have, whatever ideas they have, and to make adjustments because life changes. And so here is our overview of eligibility. So earlier I mentioned that there is really two things that you need to keep in mind if you want to consider self-direction. And those two things is, am I deemed eligible by OPWDD? And do I have the HCBS waiver? If I have these two things, then I can move forward with self-direction. If I don't, then let's back up a little bit. And what we need to then assess is, are you first a New York State resident? This program is exclusive to New York State. So anyone who's out of New York will not be eligible for this program. The second thing is, does this client have a developmental disability? And that eligibility process is done through OPWDD. That is the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Does a participant have active Medicaid? Do they have a care manager? And the care manager is someone who helps build a life plan for the client. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the care manager is someone who OPWDD will also help connect the participant with. And if a person has all these things checked off, then we can consider next steps for moving into self-direction. And here is our discussion about who are really at the core of this self-directed model. The participant obviously is at the core. The participant needs to be involved throughout the entire process from day one, every step of the way. The care manager, and this is the person who you can choose through OPWDD to work with the team. And this person has so many roles. One of the main roles is that they help bridge tons of services for the participant and OPWDD. So they help connect the participant with different classes and camps and apply for different reimbursements. And They do that on a traditional model. On a self-directed model, their responsibilities primarily revolve around building what we call a life plan document. And this life plan document is a document that details what the participants' goals are, what the participants' values are, some safeguards that need to be in place. Let's say a participant has certain allergies, that all needs to be detailed in this document. Um, the life plan, often referred to as the LP, has this narrative tone to it. And it is really supposed to read off as the participant advocating for themselves and what is it that their interests are in. So it's a very important document, and it is the document on which all services are built upon. If, for example, the life plan does not mention a particular service or interest, then it's really hard in self-direction to fund that service. Meaning, if in a life plan, we mentioned that a participant has an interest in the arts, and in socializing, but we don't mention that the participant enjoys fitness classes, then it's really hard to use the self-direction budget to fund any fitness classes, because the budget needs to reflect closely that which is written in the life plan. And so that's the care manager's role. And the support broker, who works closely with the care manager in editing the life plan and providing feedback and how to make certain tweaks so that the life plan is more compliant with the self-directed budget. The support broker is actually the role that I play, and that is the person who builds out the Excel sheet. So after the state has deemed you eligible and says you are able to use X amount of dollars, let's say $40,000 again, the support broker works to write that out in an Excel sheet, works to put the money in the place that you want it to be in the different categories, whether it be community classes, camps, staffing supports, lots of categories. We'll actually get into that right after this. And the support broker also helps build connections in the community. So if the client is interested in really involving themselves in horseback riding, for example, so the broker can help build those connections with horseback riding services in the community and see if it's a good fit. And if it's a good fit, then we can use that budget to pay for horseback riding lessons. So the broker helps bridge those community relationships. And the broker has another really important goal, and that is to make sure that the person, the participant, is not exceeding their expenditure every month or by the end of the year, because the budget does not replenish itself before the end of the year. So you cannot exceed your budget amount. If you surpass it, then you have to wait until the next year comes. And the broker is there to keep you on pace and tell you, for example, you are burning through your money too quickly. And if you keep up this pace, you won't have enough money by the end of the year or to finish the rest of the year. So slow down here. Maybe, hold off on some of these classes so you can pay for some of these other things that you need that are a little more pressing to have. So that's what the broker does. And then another key player in this self-directed model is called the fiscal intermediary, the FI. And the FI is what I like to imagine as the bank. If a participant is allotted $40,000, that money never comes to your personal checking account, right? This is imaginary money. You have to remember this is imaginary money. I like to imagine that the money goes to the FI, because the FI has tons of responsibilities. Some of the responsibilities of the FI are that they are the ones who are reimbursing the classes. So if you go and you pay for, let's say, a horseback riding lesson out of your pocket, and you are now looking to be reimbursed by the budget, right, by your budget allocated to you, You submit your receipts to the FI, and the FI then expenses it from your budget and cuts you your reimbursement check. The FI is also responsible for doing the background checks on all your staffing support. So if you plan on hiring a one-to-one worker to work with the participant, then the FI is going to run the background check. They're going to do an onboarding process, and the FI is going to be the one who pays them through the budget. So the FI serves as that sort of employer model. You get to choose who you want to be your FI. There are different agencies that serve as FIs, and there's many to choose from. So you get to choose who you want to be your FI, and different FIs have different appeals to them. So the FI plays that role. The FI also is responsible for paying the support broker. And yeah, they really monitor a bunch of the expenditures as well. So they are the ones who send the expenditure reports to the broker, who then reviews it with the participant. And then there's someone called the self-direction liaison. And this is someone who you'll find at the OPWDD offices, and they're the ones who really provide training for the FIs and for the brokers and help guide the process. Right? They overlook every budget that's submitted. They check for review, like for errors. They're kind of like the last stop in this whole budget approval process. If they approve of everything, then odds are you're good to go. And they're really, really resourceful and really helpful. They're the ones who, like I said, offer a lot of training to help brokers and FIs. Now, here's where we get to your imaginary checking account, or what they call the personal resource account. The amount of money that is put in this account is directly correlated to what we call the needs assessment scores. And these are linked to a participant's behavior levels, health, and sort of like severity of disability. Depending on how severe the disability is, that will impact how much funding the participant will receive. The more severe, the more money. The less severe, the less money. The PRA, like I mentioned, cannot be exceeded. Once you burn through it, you're done. You have to wait till the next year comes around. That's why it's really important for you to work with the broker to pace yourself. It's reviewed every year at minimum. It's reviewed sometimes more than that. And something that can affect the amount of money that you're allotted is where you live, how old you are. Because if you are, for example, a young kid, you may not need as much money as an adult will need, because as a young kid, you're not going to be burdened with paying for rent, whereby as an adult, you may have that responsibility of paying for your own rent. So you need a little more money to do that stuff as an adult. The other thing is whether you are enrolled in school or not. So if you're enrolled in school, then your 8 to 3 p.m., so 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. day is busy, right? You're in school. If you are not enrolled in school, meaning you graduated school, then you have all this extra time on your hands. And so now your Monday through Friday is wide open, your calendar is open. So we need to find things for you to do, and you need more money for that. So these are things that impact how much money a participant can receive. And once we have an idea of how much money someone has, what we do is we start working on building the budget. And the broker works directly with the family and participant on working on that Excel sheet, putting money in the different categories, which we'll come to discuss really soon. And that's actually the most exciting part of this presentation, is what types of services can you pay for? So the broker works with the family on building the Excel sheet. And then the broker sends that to the FI, right? The fiscal intermediary, the imaginary bank. The FI looks that over If the FI thinks it's okay, they forward that to the DDRO office, the liaisons. They look at that. If it's good to go, it gets filed for approval, and you're good to go. Um, and when you're building this budget, it's really important, like I said, that um, it reflects whatever interests are written in the life plan that that care manager writes. So the budget needs to pay for things that are mentioned in the life plan. It cannot pay for things that are not mentioned in the life plan. Okay, now here is the good stuff. This is now where the conversation takes its crescendo. So staffing supports, right? Like what can you do with staffing supports? You in self-directed models have a lot of options when it comes to staffing support. You get to choose who you want to hire, right? You get to choose how frequently they work for you. You get to choose how much you pay them within limits. There's caps to how much you can pay them, but you can choose how much you can pay them. There's ranges, and you can make it really competitive. Um, you can choose um, what type of worker you want, whether you want a community habilitation worker or if you want a respite worker. We'll define those terms. So a community habilitation worker is a worker who will work on specific goals that the participant has. And a respite worker is a worker who will relieve the caregivers of their responsibilities. So they're more of a supervisor. They look over the participant, but they're not actively working on goals. Um, and whoever you choose to hire, they go through the FI, right, for that clearance process and background check, and they get onboarded with the FI, who then cuts them their checks. So there's a lot of support there, and you can also actually um, you can also have someone help you manage your staff by making sure timesheets are submitted correctly, by having someone overlook that, and you can pay for someone to do that to make sure that your staff is doing things the right way. So there's a lot of cool things that happen when it comes to staffing supports in the self-directed model. Here is one of the categories. This is a specific category in the self-directed budget. It's called the individual directed goods and services. In this category, um, you can use the budget to pay for things that you can't otherwise pay for um, through like Medicaid or the federal HCBS waiver. Um, so this is a cool category because it has a cap of $32,000. I have to remind you, I know it says $32,000. It doesn't mean that you have $32,000. So you have to remember that it has a cap of $32,000, and you get to choose how much money of the money that you were given or allotted by the state to use you want to put in this category. So if you were allowed $40,000, then that means you can use up to $32,000 of that $40,000 in this category, which means that you only have $8,000 to use in other categories, right? Um, so just because it says $32,000 doesn't mean that you may put $32,000 in there or that you have $32,000 in there. And what does this category really cover, right? Some real examples are community classes, such as um, yoga classes or gym classes, socialization classes, anxiety training classes, uh, or publicly made available lessons such as horseback riding, one-on-one swim coaching, uh, piano lessons, vocal training. It's really, really open. The criteria for it to be a class that is eligible for reimbursement is that it needs to be a class that's open to the public and who has their hourly rate uh, publicly advertised. So as long as it's a class that is made available to the public and it's not a class or a service that's exclusive to people with disabilities, then we can pay for it. If it's a class or a service that is exclusive to people with disabilities, then the budget will not pay for it. Because the model here is to really integrate people in a setting that is a public and community setting, not to be put in a place where they may not have the opportunity to integrate with the community as much. There is a workaround around this, just so you know. You could have a community class or a public class that can market itself as having a focus on working with people with disabilities, but it's not exclusive to those people, and that's totally fine. This category will also pay for organizational memberships or health club memberships like YMCA, the gym. It'll pay only for the participant. It won't pay for like a family membership to the YMCA, but it'll pay for their membership. It'll also pay for some household items and services. And that's a really deep category. You might need some small appliances around the house, and it can get that stuff. There's things that are not covered in here as well. It'll also cover for transportation to and fro community classes or other categories that are in this sort of big umbrella. So if I need to take an Uber to get to my horseback riding lessons, it'll pay for that Uber. If I need to take a train, it'll pay for my train expense, or a paratransit, like an accessorized service. It'll pay for that as well. So it'll pay for my transportation to classes that are being funded by the budget. So it won't pay for me to go visit grandma, but it'll pay for me to go work on my classes. It'll also pay for camps, so summer camps, winter camps. It'll pay for that within limits. So each of these categories that I'm going through here are subcategories of the IDGS umbrella. And so some of these have their own caps. So for example, camps have a $4,000 cap, but that's details that I will spare you and is beyond our conversation here. Another category, a category that's really exciting, is called the other than personal services. And it's capped at $3,000. And it's for things that aren't otherwise Medicaid fundable. And it's really there to increase independence at home. And you have to exhaust every other pathway of reimbursement and funding before you can use this. But it's really cool because what it will pay for are, and know that there's criteria for each of these things, right? It'll pay for your phone bill, your internet bill, and some sub criteria for this needs to be, for example, like the participant needs to be over 18 years old. Software doesn't have that requirement, so it can pay for, let's say, an AAC software on a tablet, communication software, whatever software the participant needs. It'll pay for staff activity fees. So if you have a one-to-one worker on your budget who works with the participant, it'll pay for, let's say, that worker's entry into the movie theaters or Six Flags or wherever they need to get to. It'll also pay for advertising to recruit staff. Often brokers will use care.com and try to advertise on different maybe newspapers to help and recruit staff for the participant if the family doesn't have people in mind who they want to work with the participant. So it'll pay for that advertisement, and some personal transportation, any expenses that you may have in like training the staff. It'll also pay for clothing. It's not a lot of money. It's $250 for the year, but it's something. And there's a stipend for food. It's only really used in emergency situations because there's other programs that are available through the state for food subsidies. And it also covers things such as like goods and services that are to promote health or independence and safety. So that can look like a GPS tracker. If there's a participant who likes to take off and run away or gets lost a lot, budget will pay for a GPS tracker so that you have a way of keeping track. Now, one of the most exciting categories is one called family reimbursed respite. In this category, let's say a family has an emergency and they need to take off because life happens, and you need to have flexibility to kind of bend with whatever hurdles are coming your way in life. And if you need to, for any reason, take off for a day, a week, or whatever it is, and you need to, let's say, leave the participant somewhere with someone whom you trust, but you want to compensate that person just to incentivize that person to look over the participant, you can do so here. You are allotted up to $3,000 annually. And the really cool thing about this is that the person who will look over the participant, who will provide that respite service, does not need to go through any onboarding process. They don't need to be cleared by the FI. So it's really open to you, whoever you want to work as the respite worker for the time being while you need to run and do whatever you need to do. You have that ability to make that choice, and you get to pay up to $3,000. The reason why no one gets onboarded for this is because the money comes back to you. You're the one who's reimbursed as the designated payee. So you're already in the system, and they just want to know maybe what was the person's name, what was their address, and great, here's your money for paying that person to look over your cared one. So it's a really, really, really powerful and cool category. Another category to the budget is called the housing supports, and there's a lot of supports here. One of them is called the live-in caregiver support. This one is a really neat concept where if there's a participant who's over 18 living by themselves, there's also, by the way, a housing subsidy that'll help pay for the participant's rent if the rent or the apartment has their name on the lease on it, right? So like the participant has to have their name on the lease and or on I guess the rental agreement. So long as the participant has their name on it, then you can receive a housing subsidy through the budget. But the live-in caregiver model allows someone who's not related to the participant to live in the same home. They'll have their own room, and the budget will pay for their room and board, which means their portion of the rent and some food expenses. I know someone who's on self-direction. He has his own apartment, and he has this live-in caregiver model where there's a couple that lives with him, someone who his mom really trusts. They vetted them out, made sure that they were good people. And so this couple lives in another room in the same apartment, and their responsibilities are to make sure that the stove is kept off. The gentleman has his clothing for the next day before he goes to work. His clothing matches. His clothes are clean. The clothes are in the drawers the right way. So they're really offering minimal supports, but just kind of keeping an eye just to make sure everything's okay. And in exchange, their rent is paid for, and they have a little subsidy for food. So it's a pretty cool trade-off. Another model is the community habilitation worker, and this is someone who works one-to-one with the participant and helps them with their goals. So they can help them with their goals at home, helps them with their goals in the community, or wherever they have goals. That can be independence goals or safety goals. Another model is called the paid neighbor, and that's if a participant has their own space where they're living. They can have someone on stipend, a neighbor who's on stipend, just to also kind of keep an eye to make sure everything is okay. If there's anything that's ever needed, the neighbor is there. Other things such as, lawnmower removal or snow removal if needed, if the participant's living in a house. And so there's a lot of angles here, but know that this housing subsidy is only made available to someone who's an adult and someone whose name is on the lease. So self-direction is also made available to children who are in school. You can have respite workers work with the child. That is the person who supervises the child but doesn't work on any particular goals. You can have the child who's in school also participate in community classes, like basketball lessons or swimming lessons or socialization lessons, horseback riding, camps as well whenever they're off from school. They can also have that community habilitation worker working with them on specific goals. Um, they're also allowed to use the OTPS category. That was that category, if you remember, that paid for personal use transportation. It also paid for the GPS tracker. It also paid for clothing up to $250. It also paid for software as it relates to the participant's disability. So communication software, and so on and so forth, whatever is unique to the participant's needs. The budget will not pay for clinical services that are covered by the Department of Education. So you can't pay for a speech therapist. You can't pay for an occupational therapist. Anything that you can otherwise receive through school, you cannot pay for with your budget. And children who are homeschooled can also have a self-direction budget. So that was a really, really, really brief overview of what self-direction was. Um, what what happens next is that, after you've built out what types of services and supports you want for the participant, whether they want to really put a lot of money in community classes, or do they want to put the chunk of their money in hiring staff to support them. After that's all built out, the broker submits that budget to the FI, who then submits that budget to the DDRO, and they approve it, and it comes back to you in the form of a letter. And that letter is made, everyone gets a copy of that. Everyone on the team essentially gets a copy of that letter. And then services get to start thereafter. So here are some of the steps. I know we've already discussed this, but what you need to do if you are interested in participating in self-direction, the most important thing I would tell anyone to do is make sure you go through OPWDD's eligibility process. You attend what they call their front door training session. And from there on, you kind of you familiarize yourself with the system. You start to delve into what's offered, what's not offered. And as you grow more comfortable, then you can start looking into self-direction. And there's more to that, right? Like once you're eligible, then you go through what's called like a self-direction information session. And after that, you get a certificate, and then you can apply for self-direction. And you just have to contact a self-direction broker to get started. This is probably my most important slide. It's like the caution message that comes at the end of movies, like discretion. Self-direction is really cool. It's really powerful. It's really empowering. I've never seen a program like this before, where instead of the money following a particular agency and the participant has to go to an agency, the money follows the participant. And so wherever the participant goes, the money goes with the participant, which is really different. And I thought it was actually pretty revolutionary. But what's really required here is that the participant can either make choices for themselves, and if not, that's okay. But the participant has to have people who care about them, that will help them throughout this process. Self-direction isn't a model where you can just subscribe and just like forget about it. You need to really be active. You need to be on top of everything. You need to be organized. You need to keep receipts. You need to check on timesheets. You need to monitor expenditure reports. It requires a lot more, right? Because you have a lot more power here, a lot more power of choice, a lot more power to hire people and fire people. But because you have all of this, you also have to spend more time and be a lot more responsible. So I would just I like to advise families, if they're not familiar with it at all, to at least get familiarized with OPWDD, start the process. And if they feel like they can handle the traditional route, which is the route where agencies are the ones that really get the money, you don't really see any money. If you can handle that and you can navigate that environment, then you can start exploring the next step, which is self-direction. And so thank you all for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. If Sister Yasmin, if you want to field any questions. I know I went a little over, but hopefully you can still take questions.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ibrahim, for doing this very informative session today. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the comments. Okay, if there aren't any questions currently, please feel free to reach out to Brother Ibrahim, and inshallah, we will go ahead and end the live stream. Thank you so much again, Brother Ibrahim.
Thank you guys so much for having me.